Good morning, Rosalind.
Good morning, Donna.
How are you enjoying Trinidad so far?
I haven't seen very much of it. I can tell you all about the Hilton Hotel. You wouldn't want to hear, but anyway, I'm hoping that today and tomorrow and Monday, I'm going to Tobago over the weekend. I'll see a lot more of it.
On a tour?
Yes.
That's a different Trinidad.
It's a different
no,
I know,
different Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, but I do know that.
Yes.
I had to get a flight.
So, Roz, tell us something about your journey.
Okay.
Why did you pursue, for instance, environmental law?
Okay.
You know, what drives you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've always known I wanted to be a lawyer since I was aged 8. And that was because I was very busy watching a black and white TV series, Perry Mason. Do any of you know it? And I just loved the fact that Perry Mason, got off the wrongly accused. And I remember even at that young age feeling a sense of good, I didn't know how to describe that feeling, but as time went on, I realized that it was this sense of, I love justice, and getting wrongs righted. So with that in mind, at that age, I decided I was going to be a lawyer. Fortunately, my parents also agreed, at least, I'm sure it's the same with Caribbean parents. I had chosen a career that was acceptable to them. But the interesting thing was that I loved English and history. So I did that as my first degree at the University of Ghana. I was born in England to my mum, who was a single parent at the time, but we moved back to Ghana when I was 2 years old. And so I studied there till I finished my first degree in English, came to England and did law. So I did general law. Then as time went on, I sort of thought, I love Perry Mason, but I don't want to go and stand in court and defend alleged criminals, even if they're innocent. That wasn't my thing. I just felt I actually wanted to save the world. I still do, but I'm a little more tempered now about it, because I thought I could save the world single-handedly. I thought I had all the solutions to the world's problems. So I then decided, after I'd done my first degree in law in the UK, to do a master's. And for the first time took advice on what to do. And I met a lovely lady who worked at the World Bank and was in UK. And she was responsible for education. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, and this was in 1990, she said to me, well, environmental law is an up-and-coming area. And actually, if you took a subject in environmental law for your master's, you'd position yourself very well. Because she said, I'm not sure there are many women in environmental law at the moment, and they don't think I know of any black women in environmental law. So I thought, I've got no idea what this is. No women, no black women, that's for me. So I did a master's. I took a number of subjects and did environmental law as part of that. And I think that's been the trajectory of my career. So it's this, and I've always, I've always liked development, but more passionately, I've loved business. And so it was the combination of the two. So I became an environmental lawyer. I did a lot of policy work, working for UNEP. I went to South Africa not long after the apartheid regime was over and worked with the government there as they were revising a lot of the environmental laws, which were quite prejudicial, as you can imagine, to black people. So I was in a think tank that was working at revising those laws. And then I joined Anglo American as their in-house lawyer. And so it goes. I don't want to bore everybody with the long history. It's been a very interesting journey, I can tell you.
You can't bore us. Your entire life is extremely exciting. So there's nothing you can do that's boring.
So I've been a lawyer, but I went into De Beers as a lawyer. And I came out as an executive responsible for government relations and CSR. So this is further down the line. And I say this because in our life's journeys, sometimes people see us and recognize something in us that we don't recognize in ourselves. So I went into De Beers. I was a corporate lawyer. The CEO of De Beers at the time, who I worked with very closely because we're negotiating agreements with South African government, Botswana government, Namibian government, one day called me into his office and said, when he was taking over as CEO of De Beers London, I'm forming an executive team. And he had chosen all his executive team. And he said, and I want you to be part of it and be responsible for government relations and corporate social responsibility. And I thought, why? I'm a commercial and corporate lawyer now, because I had left environmental law aside a bit. And he said, because I've noticed that when we're sitting at a table and negotiating with government, even though you're the lawyer, you're able to read between the lines about exactly what the country wants. And they may be tough about the agreement, but it's because there's something else they want. And we don't always see that. So would you take on the government relations role for De Beers? And so I said, yes. And he said, look, give it 6 months. This was in 2004. He said, give it 6 months. And if you don't like it, go back to law. And I haven't gone back since. And he is one of the most brilliant bosses I've ever had. He's still one of my closest friends, somebody I go to for advice. And I just think without him having, repositioned me, because he brought me back to what I feel I was born to do by getting me back into that whole area of sustainability as a result of that. I now spend a lot of my time on boards. I sit on the boards of 4 companies. 2 of them are listed on the London Stock Exchange. One of them is one of the top 250 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. Another is a very large private company, also based in London, but with operations in Turkey and in the USA. And I chair the sustainability committees of those 2 large companies. And then I give talks because I'm very passionate about sustainability and business. And I think it has become very complex and overcomplicated, and it shouldn't be. And so a lot of businesses go, oh, this is also too much. I'm just not going to do anything because I can't do anything. So my mission, I've got many missions in life. You can ask my mother. I've always coming up with a new mission. So my mission now is to simplify sustainability for businesses. And so I'm here because I was invited by Donna partly, but the UWI, Arthur Locke Jack Global School of Business, I have to remember the whole name, to give a talk at their sustainability event yesterday, which I did. Yeah, and then Donna and Sheldon invited me to come and speak to you. Amazing women. Truly, they are amazing, I have to say. I looked at their profiles. Thanks. So that's me.
You said something, Rosalind. You said somebody saw something in you, and he saw that you were able to instinctively identify what the other party wants. But in this instance, it's what does a country want in terms of how do we ensure there's mutual value in what we do. So we're here, we're an extractive industry, we are benefiting commercially, that's why we're in business. But how do we pursue that route of mutuality? So tell me something more about that.
I think it's so, here I don't know what, how much revenue, the percentage of your Trinidad's revenue comes from, but there are lots of oil women in the room, so how much revenue, Trinidad's revenue, comes from the oil and gas industry? 45? Wow.
Is it as high as 60? Yeah.
Okay. Well, as long as it's more than 20, I'm impressed.
It's more than 20.
I'm in awe. Okay. But I think the only country that could maybe match you is Nigeria. But I mean, and when I'm thinking about Africa.
Right.
Yeah. But I think I am very. I've been in the mining industry since I joined Anglo American when I was in South Africa, and that was in 1995. And then, I went into De Beers, as I said, and I've been in Tullow Oil. So I'm a natural resource woman. I'm one of you, really. And it's always struck me because a lot of the companies I've worked for, well, all the extractive industry companies I've worked for have had a massive interest on the African continent, and that is where they've made their money. So as an African woman, I am very keen, even as an African businesswoman, that the countries that these companies are making money from also benefit from it. And what surprised me was when I started in De Beers, I started in De Beers in London, and De Beers London is the sales and marketing arm of the De Beers Group. And it's quite a significant bit of the company. It's actually, I think, one of De Beers' best hidden secrets, because everybody knows about De Beers in South Africa or Botswana or De Beers in Namibia. But what happens in De Beers in London is that all the diamond that is mined from all De Beers mines all over the world at that time. Now, I left De Beers a while ago now, but anyway, and at that time was the largest diamond mining company in the world. I think it's lost a bit of its market share now. But all the diamonds that were mined from all over came in their rough state to London. And there they were sorted into the 4 Cs. And in that London office, people came from all over the world, India, from Antwerp, from the United States, some from London, none, I don't think, from Africa, came and bought those rough diamonds, took them back to their countries, and there the diamonds were cut and polished, and then sold to jewelry manufacturers who made jewelry that was sold everywhere in the world except Africa. So, for example, 50% of diamond jewelry was sold in the United States. And between Thanksgiving and Christmas, 40% of that 50% was sold in the US. So it's that significant. So there was very little in terms of value addition happening in Africa. And when I joined De Beers, there were 1,500 employees of De Beers in London doing this work, and that's where I was. When I left De Beers 7 years later, there were only 300 employees in London. The reason was that South Africa, Namibia, and particularly Botswana had insisted, when it came to the renegotiation of our mining agreement with them and our sales and marketing agreement, that more value addition should happen in country, specifically in Botswana. So I think at first De Beers, which for 100 years had operated in this way, found that a bit of a difficult pill to swallow. But again, this gentleman I was telling you about, who was head of De Beers at the time, Gareth Penny, I shall mention, thought, no, this is something we should look into to see what we can do. So there was a lot of negotiation that went on. And in the end, a brand new building was built in Botswana to sort diamonds, so that diamonds, rough diamonds that were mined from Africa, went there for sorting. The site holders or customers of De Beers, who used to travel from all over the world to London, started going to Botswana because that's where they needed to buy the diamonds. Some cutting and polishing factories were set up in Botswana and in South Africa and in Namibia, so that there was a lot more value addition being brought in country. And De Beers found out that it didn't lose out, actually. Quite a few people moved from London happily to go and live in Gaborone or to go and live in South Africa. And the company saved money because labor definitely was less costly in Africa than it was sitting in the city of London, because that's where we were, right in the city of London. And so the company realized that actually this is a good thing. It's a win-win for us. But it took a government with the political will and, I would say, passion for the country, and a business that was willing to hear and come to a position where it was a benefit for all. And I think for me, I don't see enough of that, I have to say, in Africa, because it is important that the government has that passion. And the government, and for the people, not for itself, not somebody doing a deal for their relatives. This is somebody doing a deal for the country. This is a government that was doing a deal for the country. And I so remember at that time, I just loved them, the government representatives who used to come over, or we used to go there to negotiate. The Botswana people are very calm, very calm, but they are tough negotiators, and I just love them. And one of the negotiators was the Attorney General, who was a woman. She's passed away now, but she was one tough cookie, and there was no way, that actually she was the Finance Minister. She was one tough cookie. There was no way that we, as De Beers, were going to get away with that much. And she always took a position that I'm sure there's more you can give. And, but I learned a lot from that, and I think I think it was one of the best negotiations I've ever been in. I think because as an African, I was proud of what they were doing, but also as a representative employee of De Beers, I was very proud of what the company was doing, and it's rare to get that. But it's a story I like to tell because I like to encourage our people, us in the global south, our governments and our businesses to take that
It's a good story. It's a good story because there are lots of hidden subtext that have, I'm sure, resonated across the room. And you did say a lot of the wealth of the world originates in Africa.
A lot.
And our experience has been the same in terms of we have contributed to the wealth of the West with an imbalance in terms of advantage to the region. So last week we had the 50th anniversary of CARICOM, Caribbean Community, and the heads of government met here. On the agenda is strengthening the relationships among the Global South, with a particular focus on Africa. And we've seen in Barbados, Mia Motley has been inviting missions to be set up in Barbados, and we're seeing that happening. And even within Guyana, a lot of the bids and the contracts that are being opened, not just within the sector, they're inviting African businesses. And remember I told you about the Ghanaian company in terms of the hydropower plant. So what lessons do you think we can learn from Africa? I mean, we do share a history. What lessons can we learn as we trod that path in terms of strengthening ties?
I think in Africa, we are learning our own lessons now. I mean, I think we definitely, in certain countries, and I'm always very careful because Africa is made up of 54 countries, so it depends. You know,
Yes.
Some are far more way down the line in terms of strengthening trading groups. So you find that East Africa is a much stronger trading bloc. They've been at it for a little longer, and it's a lot stronger. Southern Africa also, but South Africa is too big a giant for equality in there. In West Africa, yes, we've got ECOWAS. You know, we've got a trade economic union also there. I'm not sure how well we are doing in terms of proper formal trading. There's a lot of informal trade that goes through. In West Africa also, we are. You know, we have the giant of Nigeria, but we in Ghana fight back hard, even if we're little. You know, so I think we've had those trading blocks that are working, some better than others. But I'm not going to be. It was good you asked me that question because it caused me to think about the good things, because often we sort of think about the bad things. That's not working, this not working. But one of the things that there's a lot of travel between the different countries. And for example, Nigerians actually now use Ghana as their sort of holiday base in the region because it's more peaceful and quieter. And I think there is some trade, but it's not properly formalized. That's my problem. And I think it's important that when you do have this block, there are proper formalized rules that are implemented, particularly when it comes to things like tariffs. But in terms of the relationship between Africa and the Caribbean, yes. I mean, I don't know how many of you have been to Ghana, but I'm sure when you step in there, you wouldn't think you've left Trinidad very, very long. And it's the same when I've come here. It's very much like, okay, I'm home. Yeah. There was I came across a roundabout. I thought, oh, that just looks like a Akufo-Addo roundabout, you know. So it's very much home. Yes, we're separated by many miles and a big ocean, but I still think there's a lot we can do about trading with each other in terms of goods and services. Even tourism, we have different tourism experiences on both sides, you know, in our different regions. But I think there could be more done to attract more Africans, and I say Africans as a whole, over to the Caribbean to experience the tourism here, and vice versa. I think one good thing amongst a few that the current government in Ghana has done was this return of the diaspora.
Yes.
We've had, in the last 7 years, bar COVID years, a lot of African Americans come to Ghana on tourism, and it's been big and booming. And people have really come and found maybe their spiritual home. But and some people have started to come and build houses. Yeah. Some people are moving. But for a lot of them, they say they come and they feel they've arrived at home. You know, and it's for them very interesting, particularly African Americans, to see Africans holding, well, we hold all the positions of authority anyway, but to see that. So I think that's one thing. I also think that there could be a lot more exchange of experiences. Yeah. I mean, you are quite a mature oil and gas nation. You've had oil and gas here for quite a while. Yeah. Some African countries are now experiencing that. Even in Ghana, it's still relatively new. So I think if we're able to share better our experiences and learn from each other, that could strengthen us. But for me, the most important thing is political power. I'm very concerned that we in the Global South very rarely have a seat at the tables in the Global North where real decisions are being made. And trust me, real decisions are not made at the UN General Assembly in September in New York. That's not where they're done. They're done where we are not invited. And that's the absolute honest truth. And we need to find where these rooms are, and we need to get around those tables. And I think there's bigger power if we can do it together, because we share a lot of experiences and a lot of impacts, like climate change impacts. Yes, more devastating for you in this region than, say, for us in many countries in Africa. But still, there is power if we get together and ask for, I'm not saying demand, but ask for what we believe is just and right for us, so that we can adapt and mitigate the impacts of climate change that we're all going to face, and also to do with poverty alleviation. So for me, that's the most important thing. Let's trade, but let's have this political power, because I believe if we can come together as such and make changes around these tables where regulations are being made and policies are being decided upon, under the pretext that it applies to them in the global north only, but try then and trade with a company in the global north. And all of a sudden you find that those regulations and policies apply to your businesses. And we didn't know about it. It just happens upon us. So I think that for me is a very important,
So policy would be one of those things, but which leads me to the next question. As the Caribbean has experienced somewhat of a renaissance within the industry with the emergence of Guyana as a major and formidable hydrocarbon economy. And that potential wealth is seeing a deepening of regional integration, because there's this imminent transfer of wealth. Once Ghana becomes wealthy, we're actually talking about setting up, certainly revising the trading agreements we have in terms of consolidating efforts and policies in food security, because Ghana has also an enormous capacity that the other islands, the island states don't. So we're seeing. We have hope and we have promise that something is happening differently because of Ghana, of course. So we're seeing that wealth could create a different kind of future than we would have seen perhaps yesterday. But hydrocarbon economies elsewhere have had their pitfalls. So you mentioned policy, but I'm sure there are other things that you want to caution us about. What are some of the risks that we should be talking about now rather than later?
Well, one of the things I'll say first and foremost, because I've read about the anticipated revenue that is going to be generated from Guyana's find, which is quite significant, to be honest. And I would strongly urge that now, and I think it can be a Caribbean plan, that a plan is put in place for the diversification of the industry so that there's not an overdependence. I like to say, let's see that revenue that is coming from hydrocarbons as a means to an end. Let's use that revenue to make sure that there is, if Guyana is willing to share it with you guys, they are. Yes. Then across the region, that there are other industries that are built up as a result, so that it is not, the whole region, and particularly Guyana, is not totally reliant just on hydrocarbons, because that leads to certain bad behaviors, to be honest. And so I think it's important that there should be a long-term regional plan saying that when the money comes, these are the sort of industries that we're going to look at. And also talking about that African, Caribbean, more relationship. How do we strengthen that? What do we do? What could we export? What could we import? How can we bring stronger economic ties? But I think for me, diversification is a big thing, because it was one of the reasons why Botswana still struggles. Major diamond mining, that was what they had. They had diamonds. They have diamonds and cattle, and not much else. So in terms of diversification, it was quite a challenge. Right. And I think with Ghana, that I know well, fortunately, we did already have a diversified economy before we found oil. But still, I remember there was a lot of hype about the expectation of what oil was going to do. Fortunately, we didn't find very much more. So we've gone back to basics. Are focused on our cocoa and our gold and other things, So I think the resource curse has not happened as it was anticipated. And that's just, so I think that's one thing. I also think governance. I think having in place a proper plan for where the money is going to be saved, whether it's I don't know whether you have your heritage fund.
Yes, we do.
Exactly.
We're borrowing from it, but we do have a heritage fund.
And that was what I was going to say. Please make it a heritage fund, not another loan account, which is what has happened, I think, even in Ghana, where we have. And you do have a stabilization fund too?
Yes.
So you're doing all the right things.
Well, it's important that we hear it because it might be, I would say, technically or conceptually we are.
Okay, so let me talk about, so those are the conceptual plans. There is no doubt that the people who are responsible for making sure all this works well is government. And I'm sure there may be government members in the field. But I really wish our leaders, and I speak for leaders back home too, would have a passion for the country. Because I think with that, and like I say, if you look after the marginalized and the poor, it creates a prosperous society for everyone. So I think for me, it's about the leadership. It's all about the leadership. But having said that, I also believe in the power of business. And I think, I'm based in the UK, and I see the power of business there over government, for good and for bad, but they have power.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether our countries, our businesses in our countries have understood the power that they have. They tend to kowtow to government rather than the other way around. In the UK, they're the ones who are lobbying to make sure things are done their way. Same in the United States, So I think we as businesses need to understand the power we have. There's no government person in this room, because I do want to go to Tobago, come back, get on my plane and go to London. But I think it's important, and that's why I, for one, I always want to work in business and with business, because the transformative power of business in many ways it's amazing and awesome, and we need to recognize that. Because in doing so, if we use it for good, we can make sure that government does the right thing. I'll be bold enough to say, if I were a president somewhere, and I felt the people, and I'd always be a good president.
Yes.
I'd be a good. But let's say my ministers were not good. I would say, well, the Heritage Fund, the Stabilization Fund, should be managed by the private sector. End of. They should just. I would form something so it's outside the reach of government. Because I just think it's too easy to dip into it when there's a crisis. And there are crises, we understand that.
Yeah.
But for me, it's how do we protect that to use those funds for the purposes for which they've been set up for. The Heritage Fund has been set up exactly for that, for our future generations, for our children, our great-grandchildren, and our grandchildren. So why dip it in now because we're not managing?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, rather than...
So I'm very... First, if I was president, I would sack every minister that was there, and I would go out into the world, and I don't care where they are, and I would find the best people to run the ministry, because we need that. We just need the best people to run the ministries for the benefit of our people. After they've done their jobs, I might send them off, but for me, we're at a point where it's my brother, it's my friend, he helped me with my campaign.
Yes.
They helped you with your campaign, now you're in power. Don't matter if they helped you with their campaign. I really I'm very forthright about that. That's why I will never become president of Ghana.
No, but you touched on a good thing, because when we speak about governance, you're mentioning governance on two fronts: governance in terms of business and governance in terms of who is governing the country. So responsible governance is not just about the government, and you're saying if businesses are responsible, they will also make sure they're part of the conversation and also leverage their own power, which they sometimes seem oblivious of, in helping to make the right decisions, driving the correct policies. And I think we spend very little time advocating for policy change. And we spend far more time just on the CSR agenda, on the look good, And I think it's that look good that's causing us to falter. And it's the look good that's putting tokenism in terms of diversity on boards and ministries. And that's why I said we have to start having a conversation that feels more substantive and drives more fundamental change. And I think what you're saying, Rosalind, for that to happen, it has to be accompanied with an active working conscience. And I think these conversations are intended to just awaken that we go beyond, we came and we said hello and chit chat and we know this one, and that maybe that one can make a recommendation for me or can get me on a board, or maybe we're looking to switch roles. Beyond that, it's how am I going to make a difference? We all know that change is necessary. And in terms of ESG, it's not outside, right? There's an internal ESG that should be at work in terms of our sensitivity to the environment, the social issues, some of which are in this room, in terms of how we support and help others navigate, and then responsible governance in every sphere of our work and influencing how companies demonstrate that responsibility of governance. Yeah. So it brings me to my ESG question. So your primary stop has been, of course, with the Arthur Lockjack School of Business. What were some of the emerging themes at the conference this year?
There was one person here who was,
Natasha.
Natasha was there, yeah. You know, my main theme is, I said, it's my mission is to simplify sustainability for businesses. And the reason why I follow this, particularly in this current global climate, and you know, we're going through so much. I mean, you mentioned some of it, the global economy, even in our countries. There's so much pressure. And businesses are trying to survive, let alone thrive. And then in the midst of all this, there comes the floodgates open, and there come regulations that are termed ESG regulations and ESG policies, and do this and do that. And there's so many of them. I mean, I have a slide that shows a number, maybe about 50 or so different ESG frameworks, standards, and policies, and that's just a selection. And it's so difficult to know what applies to me, what should I do, but we're all supposed to understand them somehow or other. So my mission and what I did yesterday was to just sort of define sustainability, which for me is meeting our present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. So we do need to meet our needs, and this idea of sort of, you know, don't drive a car, this starvation mentality in order for future generations to have something is not right. We are to meet our needs responsibly and make sure that we are good stewards of our resources for the future. And the second thing is I explained the term ESG. Now, ESG is a term that actually came up in 2005, and it's really a framework that is used by the investment community to determine the impact of environmental, social, and governance factors on their investments. So it's really the investor looking into a company and saying, this is my investment. Now, what are you doing in these three areas that could have a negative impact on my investment or actually build up the value of my investment? That's what the term ESG means, 2005. I've been involved in this field since, if I take when I started did my master's, since 1991.
Right.
And we were talking about environmental management then, before, social performance and governance. These are not new terms. It was just that they were brought into a particular context or concept for the investment community. So the issue of environmental management is something that I believe, I don't know here in Trinidad, but back home in many countries in Africa, it's a natural thing we do because that's the way we live. It's part of our culture to take care of our natural environment. Social performance, that's taking care, if you're a business, that's taking care of people who are impacted by your business. So when I started off in this field, it was really about impacted communities. So it was communities around mining or oil and gas companies who were impacted by the operations. Over the years, it's grown. It's now your employees, very big stakeholder group under the social performance, your customers, your contractors, your suppliers, and yes, your shareholders too, in terms of that's more of a financial, a financial concern. So that's it. And again, I think about it and I go, well, back home in Ghana, we've always had to take care of ourselves. We had no social security system. So the person who was most successful looked after everybody else, and people living in towns or villages, we helped one another. So that idea of and businesses also helped people because it was the natural thing to do. You helped your employees, it was the natural thing to do. Governance, for me, it's about doing the right thing. And so unless you come into a business and say, I'm going to be a crook, most probably you have good governance, you're doing good, operating ethically. So I try to break it down into, it's as simple as that. And I think as Maria said from Peter, it's about doing good business. It's about doing good business the good way. And you can be profitable whilst you're doing all these things. Because the truth is that, as I often say, when I speak to founders, and I speak to a lot of founders of businesses, they have identified a need. And they're saying, okay, I'm setting up a company to fulfill that need for profit, or they've identified a challenge or a problem and say, I'm setting up a company to solve that problem. And when I speak to them, none of them want to carry out their corporate purpose whilst doing harm. if they can and if they know how to, they want to do it without harming the environment, without harming people, and they want to do it ethically. So environmental management, social performance, and governance are an integral part of any good business. They are managing your risks. They can actually create value. They can protect value. So that was the message I had. And then my final message, was that I think rather than become overwhelmed by everything that's out there, just look at your business, consider the impacts, the environmental and social impacts that your business has, good and bad, and decide how best, considering your resources, financial and people, you can manage those and put in place the most effective management system to manage your negative impacts and leverage your benefits. So it should be tailored to you rather than copying what somebody out there is doing. Because if you're not, I don't know which is the small, I guess Atlantic is smaller than BP, is that right? Small. A smaller entity than BP, or?
Yeah, well, I guess it's locally based, whereas BP is...
Exactly. So for you, BP has the wealth of, the world for its management system. For you in Atlantic, you'll have to do something that is suited for you here in Trinidad for the size of your company. And, but a lot of times let me just tell this story. So Discover IE, this FTSE 250, it's one of the top 250 companies on the London Stock Exchange. And I head up the sustainability committee. So one day I get a call from our general counsel to say, one of our impact investors, our ESG investors, who invested specifically because they want to make sure that they invested because they believe we had the right ESG practices, has sent us a 999 questionnaire. And so he was saying, I don't know what we're going to do about this. So I said, well, how many of those questions actually apply to us? And he said 10. I said, then answer those 10 and tell them why the other 998 don't apply to us. And he did, and that's the thing. They sent you that piece of paper. They asked you questions. Answer those you can, and if the other, just say, this doesn't apply because, just don't bother to answer, because you're not going to answer why 998 don't apply. And if they want more, they'll come to you. But I think we get so overwhelmed by what is out there and a fear that if we don't do what we're told to do or what is sent to us, we'll be eradicated from the world. So I really believe that companies need to really focus on their material impacts, the material benefits they can do. And it's I have a bit of a niggly thing when it comes to CSR. So in the old days, companies did great philanthropic things. And it's important in a country like this that it may not be necessarily related to your core business, but because you're a big entity here, you have a social responsibility. But one thing I find that what happens is 5 years down the line, when finances are stretched or the person who was leading the charge on that particular social initiative leaves the company, so does the social initiative. And the people who suffer are the beneficiaries of that social initiative. Whereas if you make sure that your corporate social responsibility is linked to your core business, you'll find that it lasts longer. So when I joined Tullow, they were doing all sorts of things. I mean, I sort of think, why? I mean, there was one case where we wanted to pay for a fire engine for the fire service in Ghana. I thought, why? I mean, it's not like our building has burned down and government should be better able to sort itself out. So what we did is we said, okay, we're an oil company. We need people to work for us who are qualified. And so let's invest in STEM education in Ghana or in the countries we're in. Because we're feeding a pipeline for the industry and in the long term for ourselves. I left Tullow 10 years ago, and that is still the main focus of the business, because it is integral and core to the business. If I had said, let's look after nurses, great, worthy course, but I promise you that I'd have left the business and the looking after nurses would have left. So it's just important to try and get as much of our social investment as being tied to our business. Now, the bigger the business is, I think the bigger the responsibility, but it's just another thing of, I'm very into embedding. Yeah. And I think my final message,
okay, go ahead,
it always starts from the top. It starts with us as leaders of the businesses to drive sustainability throughout the business. And we cannot leave it to the chief sustainability officer who we appoint to tick a box and then leave him or her sitting in a corner with no resources and no authority. Mm-hmm. That's not the way to go.
Yeah. I think the word you use, community, I think That's a core word too. It's community. It's not about what we do, but about who we are. And if we internalize it that way, in terms of creating community and building communities that are viable or sustainable, and creating relevance to that, it has to be who we are as a company in terms of its core values, but it also has to be linked to who we are at core and recognizing that we're a member of the community. I mean, in this room, we are members of a community. And if we don't see ourselves as a member of a community in this room, we wouldn't see ourselves as a member of the community in Trinidad and Tobago. Many of us have been desensitized to the fact that CARICOM heads of government are meeting and changing the agenda and pushing forward. Ralph Gonzalez gave a very fiery speech, spoke very vibrantly about inequity and about how US trade policy is impacting sector development. So there is something happening, and if we are unconscious about what's happening in CARICOM, then we have to do a little bit of reflection today in terms of how we see community. So that's an important word that you pointed out. So you did speak a bit about ESG in terms of governance. When you think of ESG investments and developing countries like ours, there are obvious barriers to investment in island states like ours, and of course we're looking to just rework and relook at trade policies even within the region. But as standards and policies evolve that impact us as a region, we might well find ourselves excluded from the decision making. So lack of consistency, clarity on criteria and standards of reporting are two key issues for ESG. So what can or should we be doing?
Donna, I think I touched on it a little earlier.
Yes, you did.
I did. And I think one of the things that surprised me recently was there's a new piece of regulation which falls under ESG that's come out of the EU.
Right.
And it's requiring, it says it's EU companies, not to have use forced labor in producing goods or delivering services. But it doesn't end there, because it then goes on to say that they need to make sure that in their supply chain, there is no forced labor. And if any forced labor is found in the supply chain, it means the goods that would otherwise have been imported into the EU have become tainted and cannot come into the EU. And I know from being, again, just not in Ghana, but in a lot of African countries, and forced labor also includes child labor. Okay, so that's part of the definition. So I know that culturally, back home on the continent, children work because of poverty. Because families, for one thing, I used to do a lot of work when I was with Talo in a fishing community, because we were, offshore, but there were sort of fishing coastal communities that were impacted because we had our businesses there. And you would find that children were going out to fish at a very young age. The boys were going out to fish at a very young age because the parents didn't have money to be able to send and it's not just about school fees, it's about everything else that comes with sending a child to school, and they couldn't afford to send their children to school. And girls in particular, just didn't go to school because they had to stay at home and help with the housework and all that. So, and then with the cocoa industry is the same. The children are used to dry up. It's not horrible labor. Nobody's maltreating. These are children of the family, but they are part of the workforce because of poverty, the family cannot afford to hire somebody to come and help with the drying of the cocoa. And so I looked at this legislation and I thought, my goodness, this means that if this legislation is put into force, there are a lot of cocoa farmers in Ghana or a lot of fisher folk on the coast who would not be able to sell their goods into Europe. And yet our government and our businesses, were completely oblivious to all this, okay? And now the regulation is in place. And for me, that is the thing. That's why I say we need to know where these decisions are being made. As I said, that decision was not made in New York. It wasn't even made in France at the last meeting, where everybody goes and there's a big fanfare. It's not made at these big ventures. It's made, it starts from, you hear about it there, the white papers, but I in Europe will hear about it, but somebody in Ghana will not. And we need to begin to see that a lot of the global north is putting in place policies. They're right. There's nothing wrong with them that impact us as we try to grow, You know, and that's why I say that it's important that we come together. And we need to come together to say, okay, the reason why this legislation is in place is that forced labor is not good. And actually, we prefer for our children to go to school than work at an early age. So what do we ourselves do to prevent it? You know, we can't always be looking for somebody to come and do it to us or do it for us. What do we do to deal with these situations? So if even we are the ones who pass the law to say, you know, there should be no child labor or forced labor, but when these things are done, we're not caught off guard and then backpedaling. So I think for me, that is one of the big things. And it's something that I'm quite passionate about now.
Being at the table.
To be at the table. I mean, I don't have the authority to be at the table because I've got no government badge, but try to talk to government people to say, you know, this is happening, that is happening, try and get behind it, this is coming up, because it's not like they're hiding what's coming up. It's that we don't have an interest. You know, I mean, if we had our ears open, a lot of the regulations that come up are started because some activist or some NGO on the ground is activating against something, and it passes through regulation, and then it comes to business. And it impacts us. So for me, I think it's a very big thing. And that's where the more we at the Global South can come together and really say, okay, this is our voice, this is what this means to us, we need you to change this, the better. And again, I will say, I think companies in the Global South have a lot of power to be able to make a difference in that way.
Thanks, Ros. So there's a video that went viral a couple of weeks ago, Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa addressing the new Global Financing Pact Summit last month. And he was appealing for revising financial structures that create equity for the Global South. That's basically what it was. He was very passionate, very interesting. If you Google it, you can find it. I think it was on TikTok as well. So Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley is strongly advocating for climate financing solutions to combat pending shocks from climate change on vulnerable island states like ours. How successful is the Bridgetown initiative likely to be given the existing prevailing geopolitical constructs? Okay,
I'm a pragmatist and I'm a realist, okay? I think it's all fair and well to make these pronouncements, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, you know that. So when we get the pudding and we're able to eat it, then I'll say there's been success. But since the pudding hasn't come, I don't think the pudding has come yet. And this is not the first time that we've heard the Global North saying that they will make promises. I'll tell you another story. So I've come across a young woman who has started an organization called 8B. Meaning it represents 8 billion. And her organization facilitates university loans for African students so that they can go to universities abroad, you know, abroad. And I remember I interviewed her because I've got this series called African Hidden Gems about new companies that are coming up and identifying a sustainability issue and then coming up with a solution. So I said to her that this is very strange that you are actually facilitating commercial loans at good interest rates for students to be able to go to school. And she said yes, because invariably when we hear a student in the Global South wants to go to university, they think about a scholarship. Okay, that's the first thing they think about. Because you cannot go to a bank in Ghana or in South Africa or in Kenya and say, here, I've been given a place at Harvard or UW or whatever, and I'm going to go to university there. So could you give me a loan? And the bank says, oh yes, because if you've been given a place at Harvard and we sort of see your grades, we see that you are somebody with a prospect for future work and you can repay the loan. Okay. Apparently in India, that's exactly what happens. A student, doesn't matter what your father or mother earn or don't earn, so long as you've been given a good place at a good university, the bank decides to take a bet on you because of your prospects and will give you a loan and you can go off, do whatever you have to do, and they give you, I don't know how long they give you to pay, but this young lady, Lydia, has therefore started this thing. Now, she couldn't get any African banks to partner with her, so it's an American bank that is partnering with her on this. And she goes through the whole process, and a proper rigorous process to go through. But it struck me when she said there are very few scholarships to meet the demands of students from the Global South to want to better themselves at these universities. And even more so when there are, the conditionalities upon them are very much, these are from foundations from the Global North. They put their conditionalities upon who will get a scholarship and who won't. is not that open. We don't really have that, enough of that in the global south. And that's just a microcosm of what I think is a bigger issue. So I'm sure, I mean, I'm a great admirer of Maya Motley, and because I think she's a force of nature. And to be honest, when I hear her speak, I like Cyril Ramaphosa, but I believe that she comes to it with more of a truthful passion. Let me put it that way. I don't think she's a politician, but she's not being political. She's being somebody who cares for her people, and that comes out forcefully. And my hope is that she becomes the leader of one of the organizations that can really make a difference. Donna.
Yes, Rosalind?
You get me teary. I have seen so many children suffer.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in speeches.
Right.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't care what forum it's at.
Yeah.
What I want is to see action.
Yes.
And that's the honest truth. So yes, he gave a great speech.
Yeah.
What's going to happen next?
Right.
Because that doesn't feed those kids.
Right.
It
And
doesn't.
yeah, and you're right.
It doesn't take them to school.
Yeah.
It doesn't educate them. It doesn't give them health.
Yeah.
So for me, I just think, and I think please, I'm not against any of these guys. I'm all for them, and I think it's important that it is said. But I also live in England, and I know how much there's a sort of sniggering behind the door after we've come and made a speech and we've gone home.
Yeah.
And our own countries are in a mess.
Yes. Yeah.
So I really believe, I'm a passionate believer, and let's get our house in order. Because when we get our houses in order, when we go and stand somewhere, nobody can say, well, what are they talking about? Look at what they're
No,
up to.
I agree with you, Rosalind. It's, and it's the same thing you're saying about Mia Motley. In other words, this is what she's saying now. But unless she gets into the position of power, maybe this will fall by the wayside, So we're hoping.
Yes.
And we will
but at least she's going,
because
at least she's doing...
she's become a regional voice.
She's become a global voice.
She's not a nationalist.
She's become a global voice. Trust me. She doesn't belong to you guys or no. We've all claimed her.
You can't call her a nationalist. And even at home in Barbados, they were saying she's not doing enough, and they missed the fact, which is what I keep impressing in the room today. For her to be effective in Barbados, she has to think globally.
And she's become...
Because everybody's happy when we think in a narrow way.
Yeah.
Right? If we just think our company or, our team or our group, right? Nothing is going to happen. And the thing is, what we do actually is to trigger a deepening of the cynicism that things cannot change among younger people or within the wider community. I was raised to never think of myself as Trinidadian or Guyanese or Barbadian, all these places that we've lived. But as a Caribbean woman, and I think when if you start thinking of yourself in that way, for instance, then CARICOM starts to feel relevant, and the policies that need to change become relevant. Our conversations in terms of how we relate to the global south, or policies in terms of how do we expand trade, how do we get beyond the hydrocarbon economy and foster diversification. And what Rosalind said, we're not in government, but we have a voice, and we can advocate and we can lobby for these things to happen. And you can use your jobs in that way. I always say the most important job I did when I was heading CNA had to do with the community spend, right? The strategic investment in community, because you want to know that that's going to make a difference. Everything else was just work, but you have to have a passion to care that you are not an island. Pardon the pun. You're not an island. We are part of a community.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for that, because I do consider myself an African woman, first of all. My uncle is Ghana, but,
Exactly.
But I'm African. And any country can take me on as president. I'll go if they want to.
Okay, so my closing question, and then you can ask Rosalind anything. As senior level female leaders in the energy sector, this is not what should we be thinking about as women, but what should we be thinking about the future of energy?
Very good question. On the energy side, I've only been here 4 days, and in preparing to come in since I've been here, I realized what a conundrum the Caribbean is in. One, in terms of, this energy boom that is happening. So you need your natural resources in order to generate income for your development and survival and for the future. And at the same time, you are part of the world that is going to be most impacted, if you're not already, by climate change. And so this whole thing about less fossil fuels being a solution to the problem of climate change is something that you are having to deal with every day for now and for the future. So I think as leaders, forget about your gender at the moment, as leaders, as industry leaders in this particular sector, I think that's one thing you do need to think about. How are you going to balance that tension? What does it mean for the future? And to really participate in the plan. If the energy transition train has left the station, and it is being run by those who have the money and the power to do so. And unless we have our own money to develop our own fossil fuels, there'll come a time one day when even ExxonMobil, because that's who's in Guyana, is that right? Well, maybe not Exxon. But anyway, let's just say, in a few, ExxonMobil might decide that, gosh, we're making so much money from renewable energy that we're going to lessen our investments, say, in fossil fuels. It can happen. It may not look like it's going to happen now because the amount of money they're going to make. I know that, But whatever the case is, we do need to begin to think about the energy transition as it suits us. And I think one of the things that I think Cyril said, which I did like, was that we should think about the just part of energy transition. Yeah. That is very important. Mm-hmm. I was asked to join a group of, there was some think tank that was doing something on energy transition, and they said just and fast energy transition. And I said, you can't have just and fast. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. And I can't join something that is saying there should be fast energy transition because the parts of the world that I identify with cannot do it fast. Yeah. We have, so you have renewable energy, you have to have, what industries are there for you to power? We need the money from our fossil fuels in order to build our industry, to help with our industrialization. And I think it's that just bit. And so I would say to you as women in the sector here, as leaders in the sector here, where you are facing this conundrum real time and real life, that begin to think about what a just energy transition means. Because energy transition, I believe, will happen. I don't know when it will happen, but it will happen. And I believe many of you have children. You all look too young to have grandchildren, so I wouldn't say that. But in future, you might have grandchildren, or you have grandchildren. There. So you see some grandchildren. And
so do I. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Interesting. So so we need to think about that in those terms. I think the other thing is really in terms of when we're getting investments into our country and the sort of negotiating agreements that you have with the businesses who are coming in. Yes, they're bringing the money to invest, but to be able to negotiate in a way, as I gave you the Botswana example. They don't have all the might and the power. Let's remember that the resources are here. And it is at that beginning stage of when we're beginning to negotiate, that's when we have the most power. We may not have the money, but we have the resources, and they need them. So again, I would say that as leaders in this sector, let's think about how best we can negotiate, not to, and I don't mean not to give companies the best profits that they can make. You can, they make money, but also to make sure that our people also benefit very much from that. So for me, it's those two things that I'll say as leaders in industry. And then, a third one is the diversification program. What else can we do? In the region, really? I mean, there's tourism here, but what else can we do to diversify our economy so we're not so dependent on the oil and gas sector? And it's best coming from people in the oil and gas sector because you can then, in a way, shape what diversification looks like without killing the sector.
Okay, so this is a two-pronged question. One of it is for the audience, and then you can comment on their responses. So your response would be the second prong. So for too long, the narrative we've pitched as women is for equal opportunity and access to the C-suite. And I think somehow it feels like we're stuck, and in ways that we're experiencing some regression. We've seen it in terms of global political leadership, women ascending to positions, and then that being reversed by a second or third election. But we're also seeing it in the boardroom. We're seeing a bit of a regression in that regard. We're also seeing, even in terms of local leadership within the industry, in terms of nationals rising into position, and we're seeing shifts in that, kind of a regression. So if we say we can share in that accountability or in that responsibility, what do you think is accounting for that?
Accounting for women going up and then...
Yeah, for the fact that we're seeing these changes. They understand the question, they heard it. You know, I mean, who's going to be bold enough to say what we think might be happening in terms of that movement? Yes, Candice.
This is a very personal thought, so it's not.
Yes.
I don't think it's addressing the question directly,
Yeah.
but it's something that I have been doing within my little community. I don't think women should be ashamed of wanting to be mothers,
Yeah.
wanting to stay home, wanting to be a housewife, have a career where they're working part-time. And I've been encouraging my community at work. It's not, if you want to go ahead, but changing the culture that a mother or someone who doesn't want to be in the working world, that it's a second choice, that it's a second place. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the culture is there, but I'm encouraging that for women to not feel that they have to make a choice, or that whatever choice they make is somehow second, you know. And so I'm not answering your question directly, but I myself may be turning people away from going all the way up to the boardroom, giving them...
Stay at home.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm...
There's nothing wrong with doing it.
I don't have any
but that
statistics
might be
to prove
one.
it.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I'm trying to build a culture where women can feel comfortable making that choice. The boardroom you're not being pushed if you don't want to be.
Right.
You know, that you can make a choice to stay at home, right, or work part-time, or decide that I want to go to a certain level and stay there, you know?
Yeah. And when I say boardroom, I mean it could be an NGO. It could be
yes. I know what you mean.
Business,
yeah.
non-business. It could be serving government in a quasi-government organization. You know, yes.
Good morning again, everyone, and good morning, Rosalind. I think it's about equity as opposed to equality. I prefer to say equity. But Rosalind, you made a very important point with regards to the rooms. And I think that is what happens. There are things that are done, decisions made and so forth in rooms that we may not have access to. I recently did a program, and it actually was about engendering, you know, women and so forth. I know we haven't touched a lot about that, engendering and so forth. And one of the things that we realized, though, is because of what shaped the way we enter into certain positions as well. So yes, part of it is purpose, you know, purpose-driven, but it's how are we prepared as well for those next steps. And just as was said previously, the sector that we are in, there are many rooms in that sector. Yeah. So sometimes as well, you don't even know how to navigate. You may want to, you want to participate, you know, because you see it redounding to your country, your region and so forth, but you just don't know how to navigate the rooms. And one of the things that came out from that program as well is that there has to be that allyship. Yeah. You really and truly, you know, it is very, very important. Yeah. And even when it is, we as women have an opportunity to say something that would influence, we have to do it. We have to speak up. And if I can share a story recently, last week Thursday, I participated in some interviews, and I've been sharing this story because it speaks to a lot of bias, unconscious and conscious. that we are also either privy to, we participate in amongst ourselves as well, and also as well, it is imposed onto us. And someone came before us. I'm not lying to tell you, you have this perception immediately, which is a physical that is presented in front of you, what you first see. And the person was literally just in a jersey. So we addressed, the person is in a round neck jersey, as we would see, you're going out to the market or so forth. And it was as if we immediately put up that barrier. And sometimes that's what happens before you can even get to the door of those rooms. It is a male-dominated sector. We look across our own leadership, we probably represent about 33% women. It's only about 33% on that executive leadership. Our board is probably what, 10? We have one. It's a board with one woman. Yes, we have one woman on our board, when we look across the board. But we are seeing little changes, but it begins with us. We too have to be very courageous, because to put yourself up for the next level, it means as well your privacy is now eroded as well, right? You're balancing so much more, because we understand how disproportionate, our rules are when compared to our male counterparts at the end of the day. Yes, regardless to what, some people label it, we are OCD, we don't want to give up certain things and so forth. But it's a lot of things as well that is a part of the influence that we have to also navigate. And it really was left out in the modules in preparation, in preparing us for these rules. And I feel it's an opportunity, as well as we have this opportunity here, to ensure that we start to speak about that. Be courageous. We want those rules, and we pursue it. And we have a lot of international examples now where women have gone to the highest possible levels as well. So thank you. Exactly.
So you're saying...
We have one in the room, right?
And we also...
Arlene, yes.
Yes, Arlene. So we talk about being in the room, and Rosalind is talking about being in those rooms that are not even here within the Global South, but being in those rooms that make decisions that impact us significantly. And part of it is an education process. If we only read what's in our feed, then we are reading what they want us to read, right? So you begin with accessing information differently, right? Building that awareness that for me to think and participate differently, I need to change my whole perspective on how I receive, process, or pursue information. And I think this is what I admire deeply about Rosalind, right? And I think your brilliance comes from the fact that you are very widely read and very aware, and therefore her access to information and knowing what's happening. So CSR is not just about what we do in the community and what we give, but it's a good part of CSR, which is how we link the social to the governance, and of course environment plays a part, is we can use our voice, or we can influence government and government agencies to be present in those rooms where we know that policies are being worked on. That will significantly impact us. Yeah?
Somebody over there.
Anybody else? Joanna?
This one? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think to highlight, I think what some of the women said previously, but I think it's important as women when we move up in our careers and we get into certain rooms that we ensure that we pave the way for other women, right? And not, because a lot of the times we're probably the only woman in the room, I mean, for me, it's not in a global context, but for me personally, in my company, I'm the only woman in a senior leadership role, right? It's important to pave the way for other women, but also not lose our individuality and then become a part of the groupthink of men. Sorry to the men that are in the room, but men tend to pay a lot of lip service, right? Yeah. And you spoke about lip service earlier. A lot of lip service is paid, but the action isn't there. And I can say this from personal experience. I've gotten into positions, and the people that were making the most noise were the men, because of the positions that I've been in. So again, as I said, paving the way for others, because women, especially women as you're moving up, it's in a male-dominated industry, it gets very frustrating sometimes. Looking at the boys' club, looking at the ones that get recognized, and they don't even do half of what you do. And then some women, they just give up. you know. So it's also about, you know, staying strong, understanding what your purpose is, not allowing yourself to be frustrated. And it's easy to become frustrated, especially if you're a woman. For me, I don't have children, right? So I have the luxury of making my life the way I want to. But if you are a family, you have a family, you have a husband, you know, you have to balance that. And then you're at work and you're facing frustration. So you really do have to find your own ways to be strong, surround yourself with strong women. Again, not allowing yourself to be part of that group thing, but, you know, finding new ways to access information, not just looking at your news feed, right? And yeah, so I think that's important.
And you know, Joanna,
for us
it's,
to do.
you know, like I said, and I'm fully there with you. And part of it is how we see ourselves. That's why I said, you know, earlier I said we don't do community, we are community. It's understanding who you are. And yes, and I can tell you from my experience, you have to have the courage to stand alone, right? And you have to have that courage now to stand alone. Because we can look forward and expect that we would have support from the community, be it by gender, or be it by team, or by business. But if you have convictions, you have to prepare to stand them alone. There are people who have strong religious convictions and they stand by them. But when we come to the business principles, they have convictions that they don't stand by. You know, so I would say, I mean, thank you for your courage in speaking up, but it's having the courage to stand for what you believe. And you advocate for it, and after a while you become known for it, and people say, okay, well, that's just Donna. Yeah. But after a while, Donna's going to say, this is the value that this is going to provide to you. And you will see in the future that this is, anything as, like I said, I'm not a prophet, but I've been able to say, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. If we do this, this is the outcome, right? And this is my advice to you. You know, it might not happen. I put it in writing. I've had a reputation as a scribe, so you put it in writing and say, okay, so that's it for the record. But for me, I believe having the courage to stand alone actually is a big piece of making a difference. You know, and then when you have the courage to stand alone, you can inspire others to do that, but you also find that it becomes natural for you now to hold somebody's hand, because you haven't been dependent on anybody. And you actually have the strength, that extended strength, to hold somebody's hand and say, you too can stand alone. You know, so if we rely only on the recognition of our male counterparts, you see, this is a conversation I'm trying to get away from. You are in the room based on merit. And until you internalize that deeply and believe it, you are going to keep subscribing to this notion that you have been given access and you have to work hard to hold on to it. You're working hard already. And some, like you said, some of you are working doubly hard. You can't work any harder. It is about changing the mindset of why you're in the room, right? Natalie's in the room because she's a damn good lawyer, right? You're in the room because you are a damn good whatever you are, right? Whatever you're doing. And you have to actually believe that. You know, I can't wait for somebody to tell me how good I am. You know, I know how good I am, and I know my strengths, and when I don't have those strengths, I access them somewhere else. I ask somebody for help or support to say, can we partner in this, or can we do this together? I mean, Sheldon and I have a dynamic going, because Sheldon is Sheldon and I'm Donna. We're definitely two different people. But there are things that he has that I recognize I don't. And we will pass stuff through each other and ask for an opinion. And that's how this community is supposed to work. You know, somebody will come up and say, you know, you hear too often, this person is doing so, but I don't like her. And I'm thinking, why? You know, nobody's there to be liked. I remember my father telling me, you don't go to work to make friends, right? And the thing is, until you come to terms with the fact, your work is a barter arrangement, right? I do work for you and you pay me, right? So that's it fundamentally. But then how do you extract value from what you do that makes it feel meaningful and purposeful? That's why I said, for me, the biggest part of what I did for me has always been that social investment piece. And that's why I still do the magazine. I labor with the magazine, the CSR Review, because I believe that we have to let it sink into businesses, that this is critical to how companies should operate, you know? So Joanna, waiting for that echo in the room or for that support, I would say no. Just know your worth and press on. And when you have a chance to endorse another woman, make sure that you endorse her strengths, right? Forget, because we all have faults and flaws, right? I'm sure there's somebody sitting in the room, does what I don't like about Donna Ramsamy, and that's okay. But you know what I like about her? It's this, right? And the thing is that we can use that, right? And that's what happens in the real business world. I remember when I just came back, and I'll say this, God rest his soul, Gordon Dean. Before I left for London, Gordon and I had an exchange, right? Not the most, because of my personality, kind of like, he says I should do this, and I say, and I don't think I should do this. And I left, and I went abroad. And when I came back, Gordon was the one who the first job I got when I came back was to do that consultancy for Atlantic. And I asked him, he says, Don, I don't have to like you, but I know you're good, right? And so that's why I called you. And I was happy with that, right? Because that's how we have to learn to work, And people will respect you for your work. They respect you for taking a strong stance, even if they don't agree with it. But what they want to see is consistency, right? Because you can't say, I take a strong stance today, and then tomorrow you waver, right? So it begins with a conviction. Like I said, community is not what you do, it's who we are. You have a comment? No? You're good? Yes, Candice?
Just on making a plug, and Tony made this at the beginning, that's why, to your comment on having to stand alone, events like this, as lovely as it is, it has such a deeper meaning, and I hope we really do more of this, because it allows us to not stand alone. And you made a comment about bringing other people on. Eventually, we will create the culture that we want by getting to know people that we haven't, by sharing stories, by building this culture so that we don't have to stand alone. And if we do, we have confidence that we have persons behind us that think the same way and feel the same way. So just a plug and a thanks for today.
I do have something to say for the
Yes,
I want to say. Donna, you and I are very alike because we can speak to ourselves and tell ourselves our worth. But I'm conscious also very much of a lot of women who find that difficult to do because it could be upbringing, it could be things they face, socialization, and all that, and it's very difficult to have that confidence. So I'm a passionate believer of mentoring and sponsoring. I really am, and I don't know. I have a fixed program of I take 4 mentees on every year. At the moment, I have 10. But anyway, we'll sort of deal with that. Because I think it's, and particularly if I've been blessed, I'm a successful woman, I'm strong, and I can imbibe that particularly into younger women, who they're at the stage where they're being formed, and you can help to shape and form them. But even for our own peers, I think it's important that we tell each other how good we are, because we need that. I mean, I haven't always, well, my mother would say I've always been like that. I don't think I've always been like that. I think there were times when I sort of doubted a bit, but the one thing I think I've always done is that even if I'm a little scared, if somebody offers me something that I want to do and think I can do, I'll do it. So this thing of holding back, no, I won't. But the other thing that I do, without a shadow of a doubt, is I make sure I'm as well prepared and as well equipped and as well resourced, to your point, as I should be for anything. So, I mean, you would have seen my presentation yesterday. If I tell you how long it took us to get to that presentation, I came and did, no. I may, even up to that morning, because I really believe in preparation. I really believe in investing in myself to be the very best I can. Because to your point, but when I get into that room, no one is saying to me, we gave you that job as a favor. I just want to say that has come because people have encouraged me. I was talking about Gareth. I've had lots and lots of people. I often describe it as people have given me their shoulders to stand on and lifted me up with my hands all along my life's way and still. And I really will encourage us as women, no matter what you feel, you in this room are in positions of leadership. It doesn't matter how nervous you feel in that position. It doesn't really matter. You are leaders, so you've got shoulders that somebody else needs to stand on, and you've got hands to lift somebody else up. And I think we should just find those. And the more we do that, the stronger we become in ourselves, as individuals, and the more that community of strong, and it's not just about strong, we're at least half of the population of the world. So why are we not fully represented, again, in the rooms where decisions are made that impact us, and dare I say, impact our children, who we have more of an affinity to than their lovely fathers, to be honest. So that's fine.
Yes, Natasha.
Yesterday was a tremendous experience, and there were a couple nuggets that were just precious to me. So I'll quote Rosalind for a bit. When you said that you got rid of your imposter syndrome several years ago, you know, you no longer need to establish to anyone why you are in the room. You are there because you deserve to be there. You have merit, and you have established your position. And I think that's something that we need to remind ourselves of quite frequently. And when we stand for something, we stand with integrity, we have a purpose, and we have intent.
Yeah.
And when we treat with matters in that respect, it resonates.
Exactly.
And there's no need to prove anything else
Exactly.
to anyone else. We need to recall that.
Yes.
And people will be drawn to us, they will support us, and we will in turn, because we're standing with integrity and intent, help those who come along. So I think that really resonated with me and with others in the room, and it's something to keep reminding ourselves of as we progress and support each other. So I couldn't not remind of that nugget yesterday. Thanks again.
And I always say one of the ways in which we could support each other is to learn to shut up. And this is what I mean. Somebody says something, and they say, I don't think that person is capable. I say, but this is where she's strong. You know? Nicolette, you do that well. Yeah, Nicolette will affirm what is good and right and strong and bright in somebody, and does not facilitate the rat hole. So if you psych yourself and say, Donna, I'll promise you to shut up when I leave this room, I think we would have done a great good this morning, you know, because that's where the focus should be. Everybody is flawed. Everybody has their flaws, right? Everybody has their faults and their weaknesses. You know, I've sat in interview panels, and I can tell that this candidate is going to be the perfect candidate, and they just don't present well. And you know that that person is good. And what Natasha is saying, if they had the confidence that I really am good and do away with this imposter syndrome, then they would have presented or showed up differently. And believe you me, I've spent most of my career, what I call as the elbow of gentlemen, right? Making their careers good and making them look good and doing a lot of the work. But I never, for once, did believe that I was not good at what I do. And I can tell you, they all would have had that experience of imposter syndrome, right? In our coaching experience, men feel the same lack of confidence and uncertainty, and they rely on somebody who they call like the elbow, saying, no, you're right, you're going good, you're doing the right thing. And many of you are doing that even now in your job, assuring somebody else that you're good at what you do, you're doing the right thing, or this is what you should do differently, and they're showing up well. So now you just need to do that for yourself and to do it for others, yeah? So we've come to the end of this interview session, unless somebody else has one more thing that they must say, so there are no burning questions. Over to you, Tony.